Please join me in welcoming Talia Carney.
Thank you, Barbara Howie, Virginia Russell, and of course, Liz Banham for inviting me here tonight. The topic of my speech is New World Women. There's a story about two friends who went out camping. When they set a camp for the night, a bear came charging out from the trees. The two men started to run when one of them stopped and started putting on his sneakers. His friend shouted, "Come on, run, you can't outrun the bear." He said, "No, I only need to outrun you." We know who's been outrunning women for much too long. And I'm not referring to the men in the audience, some wonderful, including my own husband, but rather I'm referring to the collective social structure that across the globe, with very few exceptions, has put women at a far inferior spot in every one of the public spheres, the political, religious, legal, and economic. My first rude awakening took place during my two visits to Russia in 1993, after the fall of communism, when I was sent by the USIA to teach Russian women entrepreneurial skills. I soon learned that equality in access to financial resources and business opportunities was the first freedom that women needed. Prior to these 1993 trips to Russia, I had been exposed through women's economic programs to the positive effect that micro-lending had on women's lives. Women, when we're given the opportunity to borrow even as little as $5 from organizations such as Kiva, Credit Union, or CARE, that made loans available to women, their lives changed drastically, as did the lives of their family members. But the unexpected upside was the newly found self-worth of these women, and their status within their own families rose. Their husbands stopped beating them. Their mothers-in-law expected less servitude. Their sons grew to respect women in a way that they had never been exposed to in their narrow world. And their daughters now watched role models that presented for the first time hope rather than despair. In the former Soviet Union, though, I encountered a farther-reaching result of the access to economic resources, or the lack of thereof. With the fall of communism, women lost their legal rights and their representation in the Duma, the Russian parliament, which they, until that time, they had in the constitution 1/3 female representation. Obviously inadequate, but they lost that as well. And now these women had to regain their voices very fast. This is a society that had a one-parent household headed by a woman as a very common situation because of the very low life expectancy of Russian men, only 58, due to the malaise of alcohol addiction. The Russian women needed to get those legal representation and their voice because they were the ones responsible to feed their children. Now the kids were not even getting their school meals, nor the medical care, or the Russian version of medical care in a country that never had aspirin or Band-Aids in its stores. Who was going to hand these women money to start a party across 10 time zones? Men? The mafia? With all of the West's progress, there is no country that is free of, quote, a woman's problem, be it adequate legal rights, maternity care, social services, access to birth control, religious representation, cultural norms, political leadership, civil liberties, education opportunities, equal pay, or the elimination of sexual violence. A 2006 survey of 115 economies by the World Economic Forum reveals that outside the Nordic nations, only about 50% of the gender gap has been closed in most other countries, and only 15% of the political empowerment has been closed. But even in Sweden, the most progressive of the Nordic nations, the political rhetoric has not fully translated into economic participation, and Swedish women feel that they are still facing a patriarchal power order both in a public arena and at home. In South America, the feminization of poverty is glaring, with 70% of all working women serving as domestic employees in Brazil and Colombia. South America has also the highest rate of teenage mothers. Military regimes marginalize women, and they're at least concerned about families. In Eastern Europe, poor men's earnings are often spent on booze and prostitution, while women's earnings are spent on food for their families. In some African countries, maternity death reaches 2,000 to 1 maternity death in Europe. And in the US, women are marginalized, disenfranchised in our court system. And gender discrimination is evident in all levels of the economic sphere. But seeking political and legal power or pay equity may be a luxury reserved only for nations that are either developed or developing. What happens in countries that are yet to emerge out of the 16th or 18th century? Recently, I watched the film The Stoning of Soraya, which takes place in contemporary Iran. A man wishing to divorce his wife, the mother of his 4 children, in order to marry a 13-year-old, concocts allegations of infidelity, and with the help of false witnesses, in a trial to which Soraya is not permitted to attend, he obtains a death sentence. Not a pretty, clean-cut death, but rather stoning, which means the bottom part of her body is buried in the sand, the top is shredded to pieces by stones. And who are her executioners? The delighted executioners? Her family members, relatives, and neighbors who've known Soraya all her life, starting with her own father. I was particularly struck by the viciousness in which her pre-adolescent son throws the first stone that hits her squarely on the head, and the second son is prodded to follow.